glorious geeks! Did you all watch the presidential debate this week? Oh my world, what was that? I realize you're all still reeling from watching two grown men catfight, so I've packed a good one for you this week. Please hit the subscribe button below, follow us, and like this video. It means the world to me. This past weekend, Armenia and Azerbaijan started fighting, and if it doesn't stop soon, it could rope in some major players and develop into full-scale war. So that you know where in the world I'm talking about, Armenia is sandwiched in between Turkey and Azerbaijan is north of Iran and south of Russia. These two are fighting over disputed territory called Nagorno-Karabakh, which lies within Azerbaijan's internationally recognized borders, but is majority populated and controlled by ethnic Armenians. This is actually a very old conflict, but just to sum up the last few decades for you, the two countries were originally part of the former Soviet Union, and when it collapsed, the Armenians there voted to separate from Azerbaijan and become part of Armenia, and that ended up sparking a war. That war ended in the 90s, but the area remained part of Azerbaijan, but it became an autonomous region controlled by ethnic Armenians who self-declared the area the Republic of Artsakh. I'm just skimming the top here. So it kind of sounds like a band-aid to fix the problem, right? Wrong. There have been decades of negotiations over this contested land, but they've never resulted in a peace treaty. We're not exactly sure what triggered the latest round of fighting, which has killed 100 people so far, but it might take a turn for the worse thanks to Turkey's weapon-wielding, human rights-abusing, Ottoman Empire-loving, closet terrorist-supporting President Erdogan. Although the US, Russia, and France have called for a ceasefire, Erdogan has come out against it. Not only is he against the ceasefire, but the Turks have reportedly sent weapons and Syrian fighters to support Azerbaijan. Can I tell you something we learned in Iraq, Syria, and about every other recent conflict? It never ends well when foreign fighters are sent to do a dirty job. So instead of trying to find a non-violent solution to this issue, Turkey is capitalizing on this violence and pushing it further. Turkey! I mean, Armenians can't catch a break. Was the 1915 genocide not enough? Now you gotta go send Syrian mercenaries to kill Armenians in Azerbaijan? One of the most obvious and significant problems here is the religious side to this. The Armenians are Christian, while both Turkey and Azerbaijan are Muslim majority, and Turkey has taken a number of steps recently to project Islamist strength. To top it off, Turkey has been on a roll with its thuggish and lawless behavior over the past few years, with its efforts to steamroll ethnic Kurds in northern Syria, drill for gas in Greek waters, and attack protesters in front of their embassy in Washington. And the world slaps Turkey's hand and says, "We condemn this activity." But Turkey doesn't give a shit because they know no one is in the mood to fight them. Now they've sent foreign fighters and weapons to a tiny region of 150,000 people, and what do you think is going to happen? There'll be bloodshed until Turkey gets what it wants. This is a messy conflict, and regardless of whose land you think it is, I can tell you that with Turkey involved like this, it will only get uglier. I am so relieved Chris Wallace decided to talk about climate change at this week's debate. Of course, I didn't learn much other than that President Trump wants impeccable air, impeccable water. But there's been a lot of scary climate change stuff going on that we need to talk about because this is a FOPO crisis. California is currently suffering from the worst fire season ever, again. Wildfires have killed at least 40 people, destroyed more than 7,000 structures, and burned over 5 million acres in California, Oregon, and Washington. Experts say these increasingly bad fires are tied to climate change and will be part of a long-term trend. I read an article last week on how the biggest threat to Pakistan is climate change. This is one of the most dangerous countries in the world, and yet when I read that climate change might be what hurts Pakistan the most because of how vicious the monsoons and flooding have become, it gave me a completely different perspective. Then a couple weeks ago, we learned that 2 major glaciers in the Antarctic are basically falling apart. If one of these glaciers collapses, it could increase the sea level by 2 feet. We don't know how soon this could happen, but it's not like the glacier's in the middle of packing the ice back on. In fact, the Antarctic faced its hottest temperature ever recorded in June of this year at a balmy 65 degrees. You know what other city had the same temperature that day? Los Angeles. Most people don't think of visiting the Antarctic and just packing a shawl. Look, I realize I'm no climate change expert and I'm not vying to lead the EPA, but it's hard to see what's happening and not see it as a crisis of epic proportion. I think there's a shift in how people and global leaders are seeing this issue. President Xi of China, the most polluting nation on earth, said last week it would cut its emissions to 0 within 40 years. Now, I'll believe it when I see it, but it makes something that they're making that kind of public promise. The EU just committed billions of euros toward green efforts and toughened up its own climate targets. Whatever party you identify with, or don't, I hope we all increasingly recognize that this is not just a crisis we need to handle, but one we need to work with global countries to address in order to succeed. I know everyone is focused on the election and that disastrous debate, but geeks, there will be no election result if we aren't prepared for Russia's efforts to interfere in our election. And I want to underscore that matters no matter who you're voting for. The New York Times reported last week that the CIA has again asserted that Russia's President Putin is likely approving and directing election interference operations in order to support Trump's chances for re-election. And the Iranians and Chinese are also engaged in election interference operations, but to support Joe Biden. Now things have taken a turn for the worse. Last week, a company in Texas called Tyler Technologies was hit by ransomware. This company sells software to cities and states to be used to display election night results, and it was hit a little over a month before the election, which is obviously not a coincidence. This is following a trend of nearly 1,000 attacks over the past year against towns, cities, and those who operate their voting systems. Many of these attacks are conducted by, you guessed it, Russian criminal groups with ties to Putin, whose crap I'm honestly tired of Putin up with. Honestly, go back to making nesting dolls. To give you an idea of why this stuff matters, this software is used by election officials to count and report numbers across the country. The number one problem with this, aside from the fact that it could actually mess with our election, is the distrust it sows in our own election system. Even if the ballots make it fine, an attack could make us doubt the outcome and view our own elections as illegitimate. And the reason Russia seeks this outcome is because the biggest threat to any authoritarian leader is democracy. So if countries like Russia, Iran, and China can exploit our tools to undermine our own democracy, then it's a win for them. I'm just praying our federal and local governments and relevant businesses are prepared for the storm that's about to hit. The North Korean military last week killed a South Korean citizen who was found in North Korean waters. This is the first killing of a South Korean by North Korean forces for a decade and has caused outrage in South Korea. Apparently, this guy was on a patrol boat on his own and went missing. He got into the water with a life vest, and the North Koreans found him floating in the water. They shot him and then burned his corpse at sea. North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-Un, has sent a personal apology letter to South Korea's president saying the event should have never happened. You geeks, it's not like this was an accident. It's not like Kim Jong-Un mistakenly ate someone else's sandwich and was like, oh, whoops, my bad. Though he probably eats everyone's sandwiches, the chubby thug. This may seem like a small hiccup, but for two nations that have been at war for 70 years, events like this can turn into a big deal. South Korea is shocked and pissed. I mean, North Korea brutally killed an unarmed individual literally floating in the water. What's he gonna do, splash you? It goes to show you how merciless this government can be. The apology letter Kim Jong-un sent, though, is interesting. He rarely issues apologies, and definitely not so quickly. So FOPO nerds are wondering if this means the North Korean leader wants to rekindle talks with the South Korean president. I think it would be great if Kim Jong-un pursues diplomatic talks, stops his human rights abuses, and dismantles his nuclear program. But I also dream of pigs flying. So for now, Kim Jong-un is on my list this week. I am really excited to talk about Chinese-Aussie artist, political cartoonist, and human rights activist Bodyta, who last week won the Human Rights Foundation's Vaclav Havel Award and is absolutely crushing it. This honor, named after Czech human rights activist Vaclav Havel, celebrates activists who exhibit bravery, creativity, and artistic innovation in standing up against dictatorships. Bodyta is originally from China, and through his art, he's encouraged dissent against the Chinese government, empowered protesters in Hong Kong, and has helped shine a light on the human rights abuses and repression led by Chinese President Xi. The Chinese government hates him, which I think is a badge of honor, but that also comes with real threats to him and his family, so he lives in Australia. His art has played a big role in the protests in Hong Kong and has inspired protesters to keep fighting against China's tightening noose. One piece of art in particular, called the Lenin flag, was created for the Hong Kong protests and often appears at rallies. I highly recommend you look at his work on Twitter and Instagram, which doesn't just touch on issues related to China, but to injustice and political developments around the world, including the insanity in the United States. Bodyta has a really cool story, and so I thought I might share part of a conversation we had this week. I'll be sharing the full interview as a separate bonus episode, so you have to watch. It's especially powerful coming from you because your art has, aside from, your art has touched upon issues not just related to China, but really around the world. But speaking of China and Hong Kong in particular, your art plays a very large role in sustaining the activism there and in encouraging the protesters. You are sitting obviously in front of your famous Lenin flag. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what it means to you to play such a significant role in the protests there?
Well, Hong Kong is the city that telling the world China is in deep trouble. And Hong Kong is a city also telling the world that people from China can adapt to the fundamental value of human rights, freedom, dignity, and democracy. So for me, it's quite a privilege to be able to experience what happened in Hong Kong and using my art to become their voice, to telling their story to the world. I think it's significant to have art within any form of protest, including the Hong Kong ones. I feel when the people, marching on the street, doing the demonstration, when they're holding my art as a form of protest, the whole city become a gallery. This is probably the greatest honor for any artist can have.
Please consider supporting Bodyta and his work, so follow him on Instagram and Twitter and visit his website. I'll put all his information up on our social media and ohmyworld.tv. Geeks, I'm gonna let you get back to crying over the presidential debate. Don't worry, there are 3 more if you missed the last show. Please hit the subscribe button and like this video. Leave me a comment or question, I will get back to you. And please follow Oh My World and me on Instagram and Twitter. Stay fabulous, geeks.